As I mentioned, Tom Chair run the streets and we're not
Right, ladies and gentlemen, it's 7 p.m. Welcome, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, to the Policy and Resources Committee. Just as a way of introductions, my name is Councillor Dean Mohammed. I'm the leader of the council who will be chairing this meeting. And could we have some brief introductions starting from our line? Okay.
Yes, I'm Lynn Rowland, the Committee Administrator.
Hello, I'm Philip Lonsdale. I'm Council's Corporate Director, but also currently the Council's Interim Chief Executive.
Catherine Hughes, Principal Planning Officer.
Councillor Mohammed Iqbal.
Councillor Mohammed Hanif.
Councillor Jafar Ali. David Whip, Councillor from West Craven.
Councillor Mike Goldthorpe, West Heathly Copse Council.
Councillor Karen Howard from Morrison and Southfield Ward.
Councillor David Caden Price from Bullsworth and Falbridge.
And Sarah Gilman Price from Bullsworth and Falbridge.
Right, just a request please to everyone if they can switch the mobiles off or put them on silent. And this meeting is being filmed. It's not an official Planning Council recording, so I just want to make members of the public aware of that. So if any apologies, I think we were all here, so no apologies. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Public question time. This is to receive a maximum of 15 minutes. Questions from members of the public on issues which do not appear on the agenda. Items which are not on the agenda. No? Okay. We do have a number of speakers this evening. I'll just run through them quickly. Councillor Jennifer Purcell.
Yeah.
Councillor Tom Wick is present. Neil Stevenson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stephen Myers.
Yeah.
Anne Daniels. Stephen Morrissey.
Yep.
And Janet Pilkington. Janet Pilkington?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first item we are considering this evening is the planning application. This is at Foster Road, Barnoldswick. Sorry, I didn't move the minutes, did I? Item 3, sorry, minutes of the meeting. Would someone like to move them?
Move, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Seconder? That's fine. Planning application, so Foster Road. So the first speaker we have is Councillor Jennifer Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I just say, the speakers will have up to a maximum of 5 minutes. And just a request, if a point's been made by a previous speaker, please try, not as difficult, but please don't try and repeat the same point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, member of the Council. I'm here speaking on the development of the 67 houses being built down Gisborne Road area. Yes, I am a resident in that area. I see all the dangers, what goes on in that area. Gisborne Road is a single track now, traffic on both sides. Only last week there was a photo taken of a horse being reared up with a speeding car. She could have come up there, she could have fallen off that car and be killed. But finally, the danger of so much increased traffic on that road, we can't take any more there. The development of this land, classified as open countryside, well, it is open countryside, but it's also rosewood fields or this field, it's agricultural land. Once you lose your agricultural land, you'll never get it back. We're taking things from our children and our grandchildren here, and once it's gone, you'll never ever put it back. The infrastructure in the town cannot take any more of this. Barnoldswick already has plans for enough new houses to meet the planning housing needs for up to 2030. Farm vehicles up and down the road when it's their harvest time, and they're going very fast. Every exit from down Gisborne Road, from Foster's right to the other end, you cannot see any cars coming into the town or going out on Gisborne Road. There has been few crashes at the Brogden Lane and Greenberfield Lane. There, I'm waiting for a serious accident. This morning there was a big articulated lorry reversing back up Greenberfield Lane. Farm vehicles, we've got cyclists speeding, we've got speeding cars. I've said before, it's a single track with an agricultural business which is there down on Greenberfield Lane where you get your big articulated lorries. We've got the big lorries coming up from the A59 with no access properly because of the single road. They reverse back to let these wagons through, and if you can't, well, you're in a mess. There's no visibility, as I've said before, from there. This area cannot take any more houses. You just think, another 150 cars, plus the other new developments in this area. It's a safety issue. And also the infrastructure, with no infrastructure, with no new doctor surgery, we have the clinic, the schools are oversubscribed now. Where are they all going to go? So I'm asking you all to take this serious and say to refuse. I want this refusal because somebody before long will be killed, and I won't be responsible for it, but like I say, I'd like you to take this into account and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jennifer Purcell. Next speaker is Councillor Tom Wick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking in my capacity as ward councillor. Many residents have come to me with concerns about this development, and I think the key one why it should be turned down today is the access from Gisborne Road onto the site. It does have cars parking either side. The junctions are very difficult to navigate. Emergency vehicles along fire engine could very easily not be able to get through some of those 90-degree turns with cars parked right to the curbs. LCC say, well, you can just shove a board of double yellow lines down, but the crucial thing in that area, it is terrace properties. There's already a reduced capacity for parking than people need, and adding more double yellow lines would just make that so much worse. Chairman, I'd urge all members here to turn this down. It is highway safety, inadequate parking in the surrounding area, and it is, I think most importantly, extending out into open countryside. This is on the very edge of town. The public footpath that goes through the site in the setting is in open countryside, which this would completely take away. As well as that, if you've been to the site, some of the houses on the plan would sit on top of the drumlin in this area, and being on that raised elevation, those houses would be visible from far around, from viewpoints around the town. well in excess of what should be acceptable on the edge of the open countryside. I'd urge all councillors here to refuse this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Neil Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. This developer wants to build 67 new houses in one of our green fields on the edge of Barnoldswick, where the only access is Foster Road. Forgive me, I'm talking too fast. The applicant has paid for a small army of consultants to produce reports in support of their proposal, but those of us who know and love Barnoldswick just don't recognise what these reports tell us. 60 residents commented on the application. Every single one of them objected. None was in support. The traffic consultant tells us that statistically there isn't a problem with the junction of Foster Road and Gisborne Road, but residents take their lives in their hands every day trying to get out of there, as it's near impossible to see approaching vehicles. I've seen cars turn into the path of articulated vehicles and have to mount the opposite pavement in order to avoid them. And then imagine the impact of an additional 174 vehicles using this junction. It's just unthinkable. Cars park on pavement attempting to improve access, but larger vehicles, ambulances and fire engines already have great difficulty accessing the streets off Foster Road. Adding more yellow lines would just add to existing parking issues, and nobody from this development will be taking the bus or bicycle to Aldi to do the shopping. They tell us that there's no risk of flooding, yet every year we watch the field below this site, next to Brogden View, flood. It's like a small lake. We don't need a 67-page report to tell us it's not going to happen. We see it with our own eyes, and we have photographs of it. Councillor David Whip can tell you about the undersized culvert passing on the Gisborne Road. United Utilities tell us that the drainage proposals for the site are unacceptable, and the nearest adequate water supply is in Gisborne Road. This field is in open countryside and outside Barnoldswick settlement boundary, but the developer says that's okay because they're rounding off the town. But Barnoldswick is surrounded by fields like this, which frame the town and give it a lovely countryside setting, making Barnoldswick an attractive place to live. There are countryside footpaths running through this field down to Brogden Lane and beyond. The development would harm the setting of the town and cause a loss of amenity to its residents. The developer argues that these new houses will benefit the town, but we just don't need them. Pendle Council's own figures will show that we already have enough applications for new houses to meet Barnoldswick's carefully planned needs right up to the end of the current plan period in 2030. So why would we allow another 67 houses to be built on a greenfield site? The applicant makes extensive reference to the emerging plan Part 2 in an attempt to justify their proposal, which is therefore appropriate to respond. The field appears a reserved site in Part 2. However, Policy Leave 8 states reserved sites represent land that can be brought forward to respond to changes in circumstances. The purposes for reserved housing sites are A, to maintain a 5-year housing supply in Pendle, and or B, to rectify a shortfall in housing delivery. Evidence currently indicates that housing can be delivered on the allocated sites in Policy Leave 7 before the end of the plan period in 2030. Therefore, there is currently no case for considering the application. The applicant is attempting to cherry-pick this reserved site, force the issue and develop it now, whereas its purpose is to be held in reserve. It will be well known to those serving on this committee that our housing needs figure is set to be reduced substantially, and rightly so. It will be a tragedy to allow a development such as this to go ahead and lose one of our green fields for all time in the knowledge that it just isn't needed. Our West Craven councillors, who know the area intimately, voted unanimously to recommend that this application be rejected. I would ask this committee to support them and the local residents by rejecting this application. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Stephen Myers.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. The planned site is Greenfield land. It's on the edge of the northwest settlement boundary of Barnoldswick, and it's outside the existing settlement boundary. It's not an infill development, it's not filling in the corner of the settlement boundary, it's a massive protrusion into the green fields. I object to that. I object to us losing our green fields. The settlement boundary, I've estimated, will be increased by over 50% from what as it is now. That's a massive intrusion into the countryside. The site will destroy existing wildlife through the loss of green fields, trees, hedgerows, bushes and grassland. The site is also a drumlin in a drumlin field, and the slopes of the drumlin extend down to Gisborne Road. Pendle's environmental policy strictly prohibits building on drumlin sites except for agricultural buildings, and it should be rejected on this basis alone. The proposed site spoils the views and vista which the residents of Barnoldswick have enjoyed for generations. I feel the development is unacceptable in terms of its visual impact. I think it looks ugly, it's overbearing, it's out of scale and character compared to the existing developments in the area. I know for a fact there are hundreds of approved planning applications in Barnoldswick, very, very few of them which have already been started, so I don't feel it's necessary to have more. The loss of the view enjoyed by all will impact on the residential amenity of the neighbourhood, therefore. The only access to development, as we've already heard, is via Foster Road, a narrow street which was not designed for this purpose to feed a massive housing development. There are many families with children who play in the streets. It's a very compact area of terrace housing. A terrace house by definition only has sufficient parking space for one vehicle outside, and as a consequence of that, those vehicles from those houses overspill into Foster Road. I know that there were councillors who came around today who would have seen the road as it wasn't parked, and this afternoon it was quiet. If we were to go there this evening and have a look, it would be full. It would be very, very difficult to get a car up there. I find it incomprehensible that a developer could even consider building nearly 70 houses which are fed by such a small road. I feel it would be a highway safety issue. The proposed site is dense, it's overdeveloped, it's impacting the character of the neighbourhood on the residential amenity of all of us. As I already said, the road network leading to the site is not adequate for safety to facilitate the increase in traffic which will be generated by this development. As such, the development would be inimical to highway safety and thus contrary to the policy MV4 of the adopted local plan part 1, close strategy, and paragraph 109 of the National Planning Policy Framework. This development actually will overlook my property. I will lose my privacy, it will create noise, disturbance, overshadowing, and have a severe impact on the urban aspect of the neighbourhood. Finally, and I feel this is a real irony, the developer is putting forward a proposal, a planning application, to build on the Greenfield site, and yet not 100 metres from the southwest corner of that was a former mill at the end of Fernbank Avenue, which has been demolished. It's a brownfield site which would be ideal to develop. And I suggest that brownfields should be developed before greenfields. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next speaker I'll bring in is Mr. Stephen Morrissey.
Yep, hello, good evening. So, I am Steve Morrison, this is my wife Janet. We live at 9 Foster Road, and we have the benefit of a beautiful view of a lovely field directly outside our bedroom window. So we really strongly object to this proposal for the following reasons. So our wall, external wall, and my neighbours that are here, their wall as well, form part of the boundary, the settlement boundary. Right? So the field in question is a beautiful open space. with mature trees at the opposite side and a lovely footpath running down the middle of it. During our residence at Foster Road, in this field we've seen deers, we've seen foxes, we've seen birds of prey, we had a buzzard sat on our wall just the other week, we've seen owls, grouse, we've had hedgehogs, squirrels. There's lots of wildlife in and around that field. Right? We can also see numerous people every day going for a walk for their daily exercise, taking the family, taking the pets, and they use that every day and they admire that view. I'm sure it's a lovely view when you walk through that field. So our objection is based on the fact that this proposal lies outside the settlement boundary. How can we consider building outside of the settlement boundary when we've already got a brownfield site that Steve's just talked about there? 100 metres, did you say?
Yes.
A brownfield site that would accommodate lots of houses. Why are we proposing to not use that site and build on something that's outside the settlement boundary? Am I going to get an answer to that question tonight? I'm not sure. Yeah. Settlement boundaries are there to protect the character of the countryside, the villages and towns. Does this protect the character of our town? I feel it doesn't. So this proposal, to me, clearly contravenes the rules applicable to settlement boundaries. The question we ask, why is this reserve site outside the settlement boundary being considered? We've got the brownfield site, why is that not being considered? We've also got concerns, it's been mentioned, access, car access. Yeah, 67 houses. I've been conservative here, 100 plus cars. Every member of the family seems to have a car nowadays. If there's 2 people in every house, that's 134 cars. I'm saying 100 plus. I'm sure I won't be far out with that figure. So access to Foster Road onto Gisborne Road, especially heading up to the town, it's a lottery. Right? I have been involved in a car accident there. I waited and waited and waited, pulled out, and a motorcyclist flashed past the front of my car, and I almost knocked him off his bike. I hit his bike, insurance claim. He was very lucky, I could have killed him. 2 months ago, I just edged my way out, and you know these racing cyclists are very low down. That came down past all the cars that were parked outside. I nearly knocked him off. That's just 2 months ago. My daughter has actually been involved in a car crash at that very junction. It is treacherous. With 2 dogs, we walk them every day. Every day we go to Victory Park, we cross that road, and I can only describe what we see is kamikaze driving. They just pull out, they get that fed up of waiting, they just pull out. I've had to shout at them, whoa, step back. It's been so frightening, some of the incidents that we've seen. It's a terrible, terrible junction. And adding all this to it, we just can't even comprehend why anyone would consider this. So using the junction is very dangerous in our opinion. More traffic equals more danger. Convinced of that. So there are other streets around the area that you can go off street, you can go up Laverne Street, you can get onto Carr Road, you can pull out onto Gisborne Road that way. You've already said cars are parked either side. It is extremely difficult to get up, even to get onto Carr Road, to get out. There's lots of children live around that area. They play out on those streets. Foster Road is a cul-de-sac, so that at the end of the day, young children are playing. And now you're going to turn that into a major road. Lots of traffic, day in, day out. It's just not safe. We cannot comprehend why anybody thinks this is a good idea. So we are very concerned, and that's why I'm actually stood here tonight, getting quite emotional and trying to keep it inside, but we're stood here because we firmly believe it is a wrong decision, and we want you to back our councillors that say it is the wrong decision to use that. So, somebody talked about the doctors. So I rang the doctors and I got through and said, can you please tell me whether you can cope with an extra 200 people? I said 200 costs 2 people, roughly. I can't answer that question, you'll have to email the practice manager. So I emailed the practice manager, who didn't get back to me. Too busy perhaps. Is that a sign that, they really are stressed to the limits? Did somebody say that the doctors cannot take any more people on? I'm not sure. So why are so many houses being proposed for such a small area? In summary, my wife and I strongly object to this proposal. There are more suitable sites available within the settlement boundary with better vehicle access that will not destroy open countryside. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Anne Daniels, the agent for the applicant.
Hi, my name is Anne Daniels from Pegasus Group, and I'm here to speak on behalf of Durban Homes in support of the planning application at Foster Road 67 dwellings with associated works including car parking and landscaping of which a policy compliant 5% of the dwellings will be affordable. The site is located directly adjacent to the settlement boundary, which runs along the entire eastern and southern boundary of the site. The development will become easily integrated with the adjoining existing dwellings and will therefore form a natural extension to the settlement boundary, avoiding any adverse impact upon the townscape and the adjacent rural landscape. Policy LID 1 of the core strategy allows for sites that are adjacent to settlements to be developed for residential uses, provided that they are sustainable until such time as Part 2 local plan is adopted. As the local plan Part 2 remains unadopted, Policy LID 1 remains in force. The site is sustainable, and this has been confirmed by the site's identification as a reserved site for housing in the Pendle Local Plan Part 2. Local plan evidence supports the sustainability of the site, as does the evidence within the report submitted to support this application. In summary, the proposal constitutes sustainable development by demonstrating social, economic and environmental benefits. The social benefits which are expected to be delivered by the proposal are the provision of affordable housing, the provision of new public open space on site, improved connection to the areas of public open space and rights of way within and outside the site. Environmental benefits are the enhancement of the habitat for biodiversity, the provision of a substantial number of new trees within the site and existing trees retained where possible, and the retention of the public right of way that runs north to south through the site. The economic benefits include the support of 90 construction roles during the build phase, the generation of £9.5 million in construction investment over the 2-year build programme, the majority of which will be localised as McDermott Homes are an East Lancashire-based business. Generation of £10.4 million in economic output, contribution from jobs supported by activities at the site over the 2-year build programme, the generation of £1.8 million in household expenditure, which is expected to be spent on food and drink, leisure, clothes, etc., which will generate an estimated 5 full-time equivalent jobs, and also the generation of £142,000 in annual increase in council tax revenue. The wider technical elements and details are covered within the committee report. However, in relation to comments received from the Active Utilities, these objections have now been removed, and the overall recommendation of the officers is that the approval of the application, subject to any conditions, be delegated subject to receipt of comments from the lead local authority. It is therefore requested that members support their officer recommendation and approve this housing development on site. I also made a few notes during I was involved in collecting a number of the responses during the application, and we did actually receive a number of support from local residents. A number of them were young families who were actually wanting new housing in the area. In terms of highways, an outside highway contribution will be provided by McDermott's in order to improve the local highways network, and this has been set out within the committee report as well. The provision of parking on the site is also at an acceptable level, so all houses will have allocated parking in line with the council's requirement. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before I bring in other councillors to the debate, can I bring in Planning Officer Catherine Hughes to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just to address a couple of the comments that was raised and also to draw members' attention to the update report, because it is important that you have now removed their objection subject to appropriate conditions. We are still awaiting comments from the local flood authority. So we haven't got those, unfortunately. We're unable to provide a full response on that. What is also important is obviously the Council's 5-year housing land supply of housing. We do have to ensure we've got a sufficient housing land supply, and I know sometimes it's difficult for members of the public to understand why we're looking at sites outside the settlement boundary, and that's because we don't have sufficient sites within the settlement to be able to provide that. So what we have is a policy in the local plan that allows for developments outside the settlement boundary, providing they're close to and make a positive contribution So just because a site is in open countryside doesn't mean it's automatically refused or that we can't consider it. We do have to bear that in mind when we're considering this application. We've also had an appeal recently dismissed in Barnoldswick for 129 houses that was in the housing land supply figures. So that has now reduced that. So what we are looking at is constantly reviewing the figures and the housing land. So we have a 5-year housing land supply, and it does mean that sometimes the figures that are reported previously are now out to date. Some of those permissions have expired. I know a gentleman referred to hundreds of planning applications. We may well have approved hundreds, but there's a time limit on those, and once those have expired, we can no longer take those into account. So future sites coming forward add to that. There was some issues raised about highways. Obviously, LCC have not objected to this application. There is sufficient parking within the site, and they've been subject to traffic calming contributions and improvements. The access to the site and the capacity of that is acceptable. I know not everybody will agree with that, but that is our professional comments. In terms of part 2 of the local plan, obviously that has no weight at this current time because it's not adopted. So proposed sites, reserve sites, at this moment in time, it doesn't have any bearing on the application status. We have to consider each application on its own merits and as it's submitted at that time. And at this moment in time, we are accepting sites outside the settlement boundary. In terms of the scheme itself, there's no loss of privacy. Noise and disturbance is a temporary effect. It's not necessarily something that residents appreciate, but it is a temporary thing. In terms of brownfield first, it's not a national policy requirement. I know you mentioned the site further down the road where the developer stopped partway through the site. And that yes, we would like to get that site redeveloped, and we do work on those sites as well. But in terms of whether we have sufficient land, that is also taken into account in terms of our figures.
Thank you, Catherine.
Am I allowed to speak? Is it all right?
I'm sorry, no. I'm sorry.
It's just at 20 yards from my house. There's 3 houses, so how can you say my privacy is not being affected? That's all.
Thank you. Sorry, just for clarity. Members have had an opportunity, the members of the public have spoken. Now it's for the members to discuss and come to a decision.
Said my piece, there'll be no more.
Councillor Mike Bolton.
Thank you, Chairman. As a member of West Craven Area Committee, we unanimously agreed that we didn't want to see this development go forward. I've got to say, I've listened to the arguments put forward by residents, most of which are very, very powerful. It strengthened my view that we were correct in doing that. And I'll give you one area. I'm not going to go over all the different things that the eloquent resident speakers have covered. But I travel that road quite a lot. In fact, I've got family off Gisborne Road. And I use the A59 several times a week. And I was coming back on Tuesday, and it struck me that it was a great drive until I got to the other side of Bracewell, and then contemplated what I faced in the 1,000 yards between the end of Gisborne Road and to the bottleneck, that is the mini roundabout outside Gisborne School. And going both ways at certain times of the day, there is no doubt about it. It is a single track. It's a chicane. You've got to be extremely careful, particularly when kids are about. Certain times, certainly holidays. It is a difficult route to get through, and it all ends in a bottleneck at the outside Gisborne Road School. There's heavy goods vehicle use it all the time. It's my favourite road user. Cyclists use it quite a lot. There's agricultural vehicles, and it is a way through out onto the A59. It is not safe. You can argue about Foster Road itself, but the situation on that track, on that road, from where the main agricultural vehicles are there's certainly a right to countryside. We're slapping these houses in the middle of part of Barwick. I lived and worked in Barwick 40 odd years ago. In fact, on my retirement, I looked at that area to see if we could find somewhere to retire to. It's a very nice place to be. But the access to and from it is very difficult indeed. It's not going to get better by 60 odd houses, not in a month of Sundays. And then on top of that, we've got other developments up and down the road waiting to take place. So there is nothing I heard tonight that would take me away from the decision that the West Craven Area Committee made at the time. In fact, as I've already said, it's strengthened, if anything. And what the residents have said tonight, I think, speaks volumes about that whole area. And if there's anybody who knows the area better than local councillors, it's the residents. And it is an issue. Footpaths, footpath through an housing development is not the same as a nice footpath through a green field, and all the things that go with it. So we risk losing a good footpath. And there is a drainage problem. People have got sat around this table with more experience in drainage than I am, but there is a drainage problem without doubt. So there's nothing I have heard, and I certainly would be proposing that this committee refuses this application, mainly because, in my view, and the other comments raised by other councillors, nobody's really addressed the big issue, and that's Gisborne Road. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor David Wick.
Thank you, Chairman. Several residents and Mike in speaking just now have referred to Barnoldswick's attractiveness. And there's no doubt that it is an attractive town. And I guess, given its attractiveness, it's not surprising that developers are keen to develop there. But one of its reasons for being attractive is that it's very much hidden in the landscape. If you're approaching from Bracewell, you come along Bracewell Lane, and virtually until the last corner, Barnoldswick is not visible. It's hidden within that landscape. Similarly, if you approach the town from Thornton in Craven, you have to come round the last corner before Barnoldswick is visible in front of you. It nestles within the landscape. What this development would do is stick an ugly rash of houses on a drumlin that would be very prominent indeed within the landscape. And instead of approaching through green fields, you would approach from Bracewell Lane and you would be confronted by this development reaching up that drumlin and really being the proverbial carbuncle. So I think one of the reasons for rejecting this development is the impact on the landscape and the impact on the character of the area. At that point, I'll just take one step back because the developers, McDermott's, did afford local councillors the opportunity to meet with them virtually online prior to the public consultation that they had. And there was only Councillor Tom Whip and myself that took advantage of that. And we made many of the points that people have raised this evening. But in their submission within the documents, I'm afraid they take our names in vain because it appears, they're just saying, well, the issues that we've raised are small matters that can easily be overcome. But impact on the landscape, I think it's, the sort of beam in your eye business. It's not something that can easily be overcome. In fact, it's something that's absolutely insurmountable. The other issue is road safety, and many people have touched on that. It's the junction of Foster Road with Gisborne Road that is severely unsafe in terms of the extra traffic that the development will generate. And it isn't a good junction now. The visibility is poor. And if the suggestion of the developers that that could be improved, well, given that we've got tourist housing right up to the junction, you know, it doesn't take a wizard to work out that the only thing that they can really be talking about is putting the yellow lines down, because that's the only thing that would increase visibility to the right, looking up towards the centre of Barnoldswick. And if you have that, those double yellow lines, you would dump, well, I don't know where you dump all those parked vehicles, because they would end up, I mean, the whole area is just ram-jam full of parked vehicles in an evening. And so it's the highway safety, and there would be a severe impact on road safety issues as a consequence of this development. That takes me on to another, well, I don't think this is an insurmountable problem, but it's certainly a problem that hasn't been addressed over the past decades, when perhaps it could have been, and that is the drainage issues. And I'll recount one evening last November when Councillor Tomwick and myself had to go down Gisborne Road to help pump out one of the properties that was flooding as a consequence of the inadequate drainage. And we were coming off a town council event, and we were in a hired van. And I struggled, well, in fact, I didn't manage to do it. You could not, and this isn't a massive truck, this is a modest van. I could not get round the corners of Arthur Street or Vane Street because of the vehicles being parked so close to those junctions. And I ended up having to sort of reverse and truck about. But the drainage issues are severe. And I mean, I've explained in detail to colleagues on the West Craven Area Committee and this afternoon's site visit, but apologies, I'm going to repeat them, because there are, in principle, there are two watercourses that come down either from Brodling Lane direction or off Weeks and then parallel with Fernbank Avenue. And they feed through what was the Westfield Mill, Dermides, where Robinson Fold now is, and they join up, and these different watercourses and different culverts join up before going under Gisborne Road and then coming out into open watercourse on the low side of Gisborne Road. That pipe under Gisborne Road is a bottleneck. When we have heavy rainfall, there is system builds up this pressure builds up in the system, and we have what's called surcharging, where the manhole lids have water coming up out of them, and that could be from freshwater sewers or more likely combined sewers, so you actually get sewage that's coming up out of the road. And that has, in the past, that's happened as far up Gisborne Road as Carr Road. Now, when Robinson Fold came forward for development, times were different. We were able to get the developers to put in a relief culvert, which has worked to some considerable extent in alleviating the problems on parts of Gisborne Road. But unfortunately still, it all goes into this bottleneck. And without removing that bottleneck, we are not going to get rid of that problem. Now, I am not suggesting that this development would make that situation worse. I understand the Sustainable Urban Drainage Scheme and all the rigmarole around that. But it isn't going to make the situation any better. And with Robinson Fold, getting a second culvert in there made the situation better and has made it better for existing residents. And the other thing with the Robinson Fold development off Car Road is that the development was able to accommodate parking for the people who live on Gisborne Road, and there's an extensive parking there to the rear of Gisborne Road, which then allowed some yellow lines on Gisborne Road so that the sight lines could be improved. There is no suggestion of any additional parking for existing residents as a consequence of this development. So there is no possibility of any improvement which is desperately needed. I think other people have covered the issues in terms of the wider infrastructure, the availability of doctors, school places, but I think there are three issues which a refusal should be based upon. Impact on the landscape, character of the area, the inadequate drainage infrastructure downstream of the site, and the severe impact on highway safety as a consequence of the junction of Foster Road with Gisborne Road. Chairman, I'm grateful that you agreed to our request for a site visit this afternoon, and I appreciate the committee members who took the trouble to go and have a look. I just regret, and Mike spoke eloquently earlier about how dangerous this was. But back in 2014, in this council chamber, a majority of councillors voted to put this land into the local plan as a housing site. And I stood to put an amendment in this council chamber to take this land and other plots of land out of the local plan. And Chairman, that was rejected by some of the people, the councillors, who have spoken tonight. Now, we may be able to win this, we may not be able to win this. Inevitably, it will go to appeal. But the green light for developing this land was given 7 years ago when it was included in the local plan. And I don't think people should forget that, because we're just drawing up the next revision of the local plan. And, our decisions come back to haunt us. And this is a decision 7 years ago that is now haunting this council chamber, because why would the developers not think that it was available? Pendle Council 7 years ago said this is housing land. So we fight a uphill battle all the way. Chairman, I would move that we refuse on those three grounds that I outlined. I think that it's imperative that we do so, and that we put the best defence that we possibly can against rampant development that is absolutely unnecessary.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Bolthorpe did move refusal. You touched on some of the points which Councillor Wick has suggested. Are you happy to?
Yeah, absolutely, totally, Chairman. I mean, the three areas that we talked about and Councillor Wick has are quite clear. highways is a risk coming out of that road, and drainage at some stage, but the impact on the landscape as well is in it. It's all in the notes, and all the speakers have covered these well. Just as an aside, if I may, Chairman, I think it would be wrong of this committee to penalise the residents of Gisborne Road and Foster's Road on the basis that we won an appeal about 2 weeks ago for a development. So I'll throw that in. I think it would be wrong. But yeah, I'm quite happy with those 3 items, and would propose those.
Yeah. So I think, Chairman, there's a thing that can I just pick up on two points, Chairman. Well, first of all, I'm admitted to say something because I got a message from the crew manager for the Barnoldswick Fire and Rescue Service, who would have wished to be here tonight, but he asked me to point out that he and the crew, the fire and rescue crew from Barnoldswick, have attended collisions at the junction that we've been talking about, and also they've been involved in pumping out properties in terms of the drainage. So I did say that I would raise that, and sorry I didn't include it earlier on. I think the other thing was in reference to the Barnoldswick shed decision. There is no doubt in my mind, Chairman, that Seddons, the developers in that case, will be back with another application. None of us have got any argument with the brownfield part of that site being developed. So it probably won't take Seddons on to come through with a further application. And the only part of that site which we believe is undevelopable because it's underwater 3 months of the year, and I'm talking about underwater, is the green field at the end of it. So they will probably be able to get 100 houses on the remaining part of the site without touching the bog. And I think that will come back into the housing numbers and substantiate what we were saying earlier on about there being literally hundreds of properties in Barnoldswick that have got planning consent but have not yet been built, although some have been built since 2014 when the green light was given for development on various sites.
Councillor Black?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Just got a question to Catherine, and I'll speak if that's okay. Catherine, in terms of the LCC highways, they start off by, or the report starts off by saying we would seek a scheme of enhanced traffic calming measures, feature select. Can you just share with me what enhanced traffic calming is?
It depends on the scheme, so it can be reductions in speed limits, it can be speed bumps.
Sorry, no, I want about this particular. What are they saying on this one? What's the great idea from Preston?
Drop crossing points, tactile paving on Gisborne Road. It's what it says in the report. That is their full comments. That's
so I've not missed anything. Then.
You've not missed anything, no. that is what is in the proposal.
Thanks for that, Chairman. I wanted to be clear because I thought if the experts at Lancashire County Council had something hidden up their sleeve that these residents might have missed, and Councillor David Wick spoke as well, then I just needed to tease that out to Catherine. So I haven't missed anything. But Chairman, this is not the first application where the experts at County Council have come back and lo and behold haven't objected on highway grounds, yet every single resident that I've heard tonight talks about highways, highways keep popping up, and if, for example, the County Council think that by putting some tactile paving and some double yellow line is going to solve the problem for 67 houses, then I'm sorry to say the County Council yet again, and I'm a County Councillor, are demonstrating that they're living in cloud cuckoo land. We've had a number of applications where the County Council come back with a positive message in favour of the developer, and that's all good and well, but I understand and councillors understand that the system at the moment is geared towards helping developers, and at the last council meeting I think there was a motion that was presented that a number of councils across the country have said to the government, you need to level the playing field now not in favour of councillors, but in favour of residents, so that these people should have a say in the process. But you and your group oppose that particular motion, which is disappointing. I'm aware that there's over 100 councils across the country that are lobbying the government to try and get a level playing field, and we'll continue to lobby as a council, and hopefully the administration will join us in doing that. Because, and I commend the lady that come on behalf of the Amites, it takes some courage to come to a meeting to speak up, and nobody clapped her, which was disappointing, but I think the message that she needs to take back to McDermott's, and I certainly speak as leader of my group and leader of this council until recently, that we welcome McDermott's to Pendle, but not on this particular application. If you want to move down, as Steve I think said, 100 yards down the road, you're more than welcome. I'm not prejudicing my position. I will happily support your application in terms of that particular development, and I'm sure other councillors will as well. But Chairman, in terms of this particular application, I've heard enough from speakers tonight. I've heard certainly enough from Councillor David Whip, whose valued contributions I respect, for me not to support the opposite recommendation to delegate grant consent, but to refuse it on the grounds that Councillor David Whip and Councillor Mike Goldthorpe have outlined. But the fact is that the system is geared not towards helping local councils and residents, it's geared towards developers. And I won't be surprised if McDermott's come back, and the lady, I made a note that she talked about social impact, that they would provide 3 affordable homes in terms of the scheme. Now, if they think that's going to swing councillors in terms of supporting another £9.5 million into the economy, that further cements the position that I've had for a number of years, that the system is broken nationally. And I'm not bothered what happens in the southeast of England. If the government wants to build tens of hundreds of thousands of homes down there, that's fine by me. If they want to build them in Chorley, that's fine by me. But Chairman, what I would urge this committee and this council to do under your leadership is to lobby the government to help councils and councillors make the decision, because the number of appeals that we've lost, and Severn have recently lost one, which is, I think, goes against the grain in terms of appeals. The taxpayers of this borough have to pick up the bill in terms of appeals that we lose. But the system needs adjusting, and the more councils lobby the government, the quicker the system can be changed to favour residents. And we don't then have these people coming to us, because they will be involved in the initial processes, which they're not at the moment. So I will be voting against the application, and I would urge other councillors to do likewise.
I have a few questions for Catherine. Thank you so much for organising the site visit. I really appreciate it. So currently we do have a 5-year housing land supply.
At this exact moment in time, I'll be honest with you, I don't know where we are with it. We don't have 5-year housing land supply.
We haven't.
But obviously it is a moving feast, if you will. So when we get appeals and we get applications in, we have to look at the time of grant and the report. We have that. Since then, permissions have expired. So we are constantly updating the figures. As you know, in local plans, the team are constantly looking at which sites have expired, which ones have permissions. So at this exact moment in time, I couldn't tell you exactly where we are with that.
Because the residents here probably think this woman's asking a very obscure question, but it is really critical, because we have to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and if we don't, it's a thing whereby even unacceptable developments are passed. So I was hoping they could say yes to that. So we don't know whether we're falling behind, particularly, because as you say, it's a constantly moving feast.
Yeah, through the chair, obviously we've had the recent appeal decision, which is why it's mentioned in the update, and it is important to bear that in mind, because, albeit a new application may come in the next few months, it might not come into the next few years of proposed development. And whereas it was already approved and scheduled to come forward in the next year, 18 months, if they don't issue a new permission for another year, 2 years, and then they get the conditions discharged or the reserve matters and various different applications, that can take up to 5 years for the development to come forward, which takes it into the next tranche, which is why I said at this moment in time, obviously we're looking at new sites all the time, we're moving things forwards, we're issuing permissions, but the more sites that fall out of that, the less housing land supply we have at that moment in time.
Okay. So I've recently read the Manual of Streets, which is the most excellent document, and it's all about hierarchy of roads where they lead, how big the settlements are. And I wonder where we visited this afternoon. It's the only time I've ever been there, I have to say. All was quiet. In no way do I not agree with what the residents' lived experience is, but for us, when we were there, it was quiet. But I noticed it's a road that was, you know, serving some suburban houses at the end, the fabulous listed building from 1699 and some terraced houses. There was parking on both sides. Where does that fit on the manual of streets in terms of a place where there would be 67 houses extra coming off it? Because there's a hierarchy of road widths, aren't there?
There are, yes, and obviously LCC Airways, when they've provided their comments, have looked at the capacity of that particular road. They look at the site and if you're able to accommodate on-street parking within that.
Yes.
So it wouldn't exacerbate the existing issues in terms of on-street parking, or it shouldn't do. But whilst we can provide parking and garage spaces, as we saw today, we can't make people use them. So if people park on the highways, yes, it does reduce the width. People do park too close to the junctions, and I completely understand in terrace properties why that occurs. But yes, it can be resolved by traffic regulation orders, but that does move the parking issues on. But what you've got to consider is it for this development to resolve existing issues in terms of parking and drainage that are elsewhere?
I was about to make that point, but I was just wondering whether you thought that that road was wide enough to serve that amount of houses.
I'm not a highways expert, but LCC are of that opinion that yes, it does in the manual of the streets.
I think it's true to say to the residents that are here that LCC often surprise us all as councillors. We're often amazed by some of the things that they are happy with. Final question, and this is a question I've never asked before, but I've got O-level geography. I've got A-level geography, gosh. Drumlins, are they sort of protected as features in the landscape?
It is a feature in the landscape, and it is in the Lancashire Landscape Character Assessment. So they are an important feature.
So they don't have to sort of design around them?
Not necessarily, but it can, as Councillor Whip said, it can lead to impacts on the landscape in terms of your views in and out of the site. But it's not necessarily a protected thing that we need to design around that. But it is a landscape feature, and it is a characteristic of that area.
Okay. So my own observations are this. I think you see that settlement pattern has built up over years, but it's been small numbers. And I think the reason why you're all here is the sudden impact of 67 houses on this field. And I live in a sort of edge of town place, and since the whole COVID thing, we have seen unprecedented numbers of people getting out with their children, walking dogs, just walking about. And that's part of the glories of Pendle Towns, that you can leave your house, you don't have to get in your car to go for a walk, you just basically leave your house and go for a walk and it's fine. And Mike made the point that the footpath, it's not going to be a lovely footpath where you want to walk anymore. It's going to just be a suburban road, really. And I think that's so sad that couldn't have been in the design either moved to create something beautiful or respected more. And that to me is a big weakness in the design. And then my husband very kindly found the local plan part 2. Just to say about the 2014, I was one of the people that voted for this site. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, what a mean woman. I didn't just vote for this site, I voted for there to be a plan. And we couldn't have had a plan unless we put in absolutely everything in the pot, which was all the sites in the Shire, many of which I completely disagreed with. But really, the reason this has come forward now is because we don't have a plan. And if I was a developer, Catherine and I discussed this afternoon, if I was a developer, I'd take this opportunity, because if we had an approved plan, you're the gentleman that talked about the reserved position, it would be easy to defend, and we wouldn't have this, you can build adjacent to the settlement boundary. So it's, you know, it's really lovely politically to just object to everything all the time. But actually, if you just object to everything, we get unforeseen consequences like this. So anyway, so I'm taking this, which by the way has no planning weight. Catherine told me that today. She said we can't pay any attention to it. But it's interesting to see what Pendle Council said should be on this site if it was used for reserved development. And it said the development should positively address the countryside edge of the site to enhance the setting of the development. And a proportion of the plots should be sought as self-build. They have 10% coming forward, at least 10% as affordable housing. The scale, form and character of the new dwellings should be consistent with the character of the wider built-up area and reflect the site's edge of settlement location. So I went on and looked again at the visualisations of the streets, and what struck me is that the houses that are being built there are exactly the same houses that they're building on the McDermott site in Cope. They're called the Barnoldswick and the Cope and the Windermere, and in no way are they designed to respect that site. They're not Barley houses, they're not Anywhere houses, they're not Cone houses, they're Anywheresville houses. And to me, although I wouldn't go as far as to say they're a carbuncle, they don't respond to the site. They are houses that were designed for somewhere else, and on a nice computer package, they've just put them in this rumbling field and next to the footpath, which I think is very sad. And the drainage and the traffic issues, the experts say that this development won't make it worse, or at least not a severe impact. And I think that that's going to be very, very hard to argue. I think if this is turned down tonight and it comes to appeal, it'll be experts that will be making those arguments. But I think that actually the government has changed in terms of, well, this council of course did put in its views on the consultation for the planning white paper. But I think that there is an understanding, especially since COVID, that sort of being able to access the countryside on your doorstep, it is a thing. So that they are my observations anyway.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor David?
Yeah, if I could just come back on three things, Chairman. First of all, I think the proposal that we've put, it represents a balanced decision. That we have taken into account the things that McDermott's are saying would be beneficial. We've looked at the disbenefits, and the balance is tilts towards refusal. Secondly, when Councillor Tomwick and myself met virtually with McDermott's, we challenged them about the Fernbank Mill site, and what they said was that they had looked at that first with a view to putting an offering on that land, but when they'd done noise assessments, it had been ruled out because of the noise from the concrete works which overlooks it. So I'm not sort of carrying a candle for McDermott's, but they had looked at it prior to this site. Realistically, I think it's location, and they go for the greenest field, the best view, and the more saleable place that they can put development. So perhaps they were swayed towards this site because of those reasons. And lastly, Sarah, I can't remember if she was on the council because there was an interim, but I think it was 2018.
No, I wasn't on the council.
Right. Well, in 2018, the Conservative group, which had a majority at the time, chairman because of defections and other things, which you know very well now, at the very first council meeting, actually kicked the local plan into the long grass because previously we'd been moving forward to site selections and the ruling Conservative group at the time required some evidence bases to be re-examined, and it was only 3 years later that work sort of fed back to it coming back to the council in January this year. So I think you can blame your Conservative colleagues for the local plan not being further forward than it currently is. But from the sound of it, Mr. Chairman, there is unanimity around the room in terms of rejecting this. Impact on the landscape, character of the area, which is a point that Sarah Coleman-Price was just highlighting, the drainage infrastructure and the highway safety. And I think we've got solid grounds, and I hope that is defensible on appeal, and the residents and councillors will be able to say to McDermott, sorry, no development on this field.
I'm going to allow one more final speaker, Councillor David Coleman-Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, McDermott do seem to have a history of choosing rather unusual sites. We touched on the one on the edge of Combe, but before I was a councillor, I had my Lucifer Beyond hat on, and we fought against the development on the Rough. The 5-year housing answer plan was particularly relevant there because we didn't have one for sure. And therefore, the inspector, when obviously it was rejected locally, it went to appeal. We as Legislative Beyond had to raise loads of money because we wanted to be a Rule 6 party at the appeal, which meant that we fought it as well. So there's 3 parties fighting the appeal. It cost Pendle Borough Council an awful lot of money as well. They did recommend approval to start with, but we found there were lots and lots of reasons, very similar to this, because the topography of the site, with hills, with flooding, with a single road access to it, all those sorts of things were very, very similar indeed. I think the other thing as well for this choice of location, clearly it's just building outwards from a sort of central road. That's basically all this is. I think what you end up with is this idea of trying to blend in with the rest of the town doesn't work if, I think it's almost like the cheapest set of material, concrete tiles, UPVC, and black composite doors. Not very nice at all, really. I would have thought in a way that McDermott should have learned some lessons from the Rough. Clearly, they still believe you spend an awful lot of money on consultants. You have them all doing endless different documents. Those are the documents that they will bring out to appeal, and then they will spend an awful lot of money hiring very good QCs, very expensive QCs, and other consultants that they will then roll out with ever larger reports to give extra weight to their arguments. And of course, with the report here, and the statutory consultees who have responded, I think as Councillor Iqbal said, the traffic calming measures are a little bit vague. I would have expected at least a few speed bumps and a few things in the way, or something, or even some traffic lights or something, but no, nothing at all. And as the member of the public highlighted, there's lots of risk to smaller vehicles like motorbikes and cyclists and such like. So I think things that McDermott haven't done this time though, given the location and the site, we talked about the being up on a hill with the drummer involved, and the visibility from long range views. They have not done any visualisations. You'd have thought picking some key strategic points around the town of Barnoldswick and looking backwards at the site and say this is what it would look like and how it sets in the landscape. That's an important thing that's missing, because that would give the extra weight to the fact that it would not look right atop a hill inside a field that's on the edge of town. So there's several things like that. We learned that as well. Visualisations are important there because it really gives an idea rather than just description saying it's all lovely and such like. I think the point about drainage, everyone will come up with sustainable drainage mechanisms. Again, we had it on the Rough, we talked about ponds, underground tanks is what they went for in the end, all that sort of thing just attenuates the runoff. Here, all they want to do is just keep it to the greenfield runoff rate, and that is what is there at the moment. So, stuff downstream is not the responsibility of McDermott, unfortunately. So, as Councillor Whip pointed out, as the water gets more and more and the bore gets narrower and narrower, then it will lead to some problems downstream. So local need to go on with United Utilities, Lancashire County Council, etc. to try to sort that out. I think it is going to be a challenge. If it's rejected tonight, as Sarah said, it will go to appeal. Dermot have an appetite for that. They like greenfield sites. They don't want brownfield sites. Nobody wants brownfield sites. We all love brownfield first. But we're not going to get the chance to be able to dictate that until we have a proper local plan part 2, and that gives some weight when it comes to that. The other thing that Barnoldswick has missed, of course, is that unlike Cohen's been working on a neighbourhood plan for the last 4+ years or so, where Sarah and I have been on that committee for a long time. That has planning weight at the moment. Government changes may take that away, but at the moment it's giving us a way to be able to understand our town and how it works and what we want to do with it. So that would have been a valuable tool. It's pretty too late to start on now, I'm afraid. It does take several years. But that's all I have to say, really.
Thank you, everyone. I think we've had a very detailed discussion on this point. I want to thank all the speakers, all the residents who have attended this evening, taking out their valuable time, and it helps us as councillors to make a more informed decision, because the knowledge and understanding you have of your local area is better than what I will have. So thank you, each and every one of you, for attending and speaking. I'm fairly familiar with the area. Obviously not as close to as you, the residents, and I understand where you're coming from in terms of concerns you've raised about highways. Some of the junctions there are difficult at the best of times. The reasons also put forward by colleagues in terms of impact on landscape and impact on the area, and concerns around drainage have been put forward. So we're going to put that to the vote now. There's only one motion on the table, and that is for refusal. So please, all those members in favour of refusal, please show. Okay, thank you. Anyone against? No. So
is there any abstentions? Because not everybody's voted.
Yeah, so the application is refused. Okay, so thank you all very much for attending. It's been a fairly long discussion on this, so you're free to leave should you wish. If you wish to stay and listen to the rest of the meeting, happy for you to stay. 8 projects which were identified by the Nelson Town Board, put forward to the government. The heads of terms offer has been received by the council and signed off and returned to the government early this month. On page 3, the report sets out the next steps which the town board is now working on. One of the recommendations is also to do with appointing Hatch as our consultants to give us expert advice on the latest on the next steps, which will need their expertise to move their projects along. So I will move the recommendations as set out. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor.
Chairman, in terms of the recommendations, I mean, the project list on page 2 is actually misleading, is it not? Because that totals 29.9 million. And I know we moved to a part 2 thing, so I'm not going to discuss that devil in the detail. But in terms of recommendations, clearly 1, 2 and 4 are fine. But in terms of recommendation 3, which delegates powers to Philip as the interim chief executive himself to detail the project, I would suggest that that is withdrawn at this stage, because the Town Deal Board agreed at the meeting last week, was it last week?
Yeah, last week.
Last week to go away and look at where the projects could be shaved off.
Yeah.
And I know, for example, there's significant shaving off, certainly in terms of at least one of those, without detailing which one it is. So I think it's premature of this committee to give authority to yourself when we don't know what, well, some of us know what the actual figures are. Most people don't around the table because were not on the town deal board. So I would suggest that that particular recommendation 3 at this moment is withdrawn. And once the town deal board has met and we know what the final ask is, then a report is brought back for discussion at this committee. I would suggest that's a common sense approach to it.
Happy with that, Councillor Iqbal. Just in terms of the timing, just question Philip. I think we're okay for time in terms of the points also we've got to discuss and agree at the town board, and then you'll have to come back to Policy and Resources Committee for final approval.
Chairman, my understanding is, in my Vice Chairman capacity of the town deal board, is that the offer of an extension, if you remember, was put forward at the meeting, and my understanding is there's a likelihood there may be an ask of that extension without going into detail.
I mean, one would hope we might be able to come back to the next meeting, this committee, which is in September, but we might well with the October meeting. But I think that's, as you said, covered by the offer of the extension.
Okay. Yeah, everyone okay with that? Yeah. So all those in favour? Yes. Thank you. Okay, item 6 is called bid.
Move it.
Sarah wants to speak.
Very briefly, I shall be speedy. I shall be high speed. Handel Council has not, over the 3 years that the Cone bid, covered itself in glory. I would just beg that it's minuted that in future the bills go out on time to all the businesses in the business improvement district, which is 337, because ones on Skipton Road and various places haven't received even their year 1 bills yet. And that the Cone bid writes a lovely letter explaining what you get from your levy, what it's about, it's from the Cone bid, etc. And that doesn't go out with the bill. So people are perplexed, they receive a bill, it says Pendle Council, they don't know what it's for, and put it behind a clock, ignore it, whatever. It's just not joined up, and that's really what's tipped the Cone bid into not having enough workable cash. And I'm sure that we can salvage it from here, as long as the bills go out to the businesses with the explanation. There's a lot of positivity around the bid in Cone, but people are just perplexed by the letter. And some of the business owners this week contacted me to say they have received the bill, but then they tried to pay it on the online portal and it failed. So they're sort of thwarted even when they're trying to pay. So I just make a plea that Pendle Council Finance Department works closely with the bid to get those bills out, so that the bid gets its own money and doesn't have to come pleading to Policy and Resources.
Councillor Witt?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just say, I think it was the right decision to not send bills out during the lockdown periods, and when people were forced to be closed. There were packages of support to businesses, and I think it would have been wrong to bill people in those difficult circumstances. What I would like to ask, I raised it at the last Policy and Resources Committee, that at the beginning of the pandemic we put on hold the process of drawing up business improvement district proposals for both Nelson and Barnoldswick, and I just want to take this opportunity to raise the issue again, because at the last meeting I suggested that we really need to get that process going again, and whether there's an appetite or not we will need to see, but I think given that we'd agreed to go ahead with those, we paused because of the pandemic, we should resume the process and see where that leads us.
Anybody else?
I'd like to echo some of Sarah's comments. I've had some discussions with the bid manager, and she did put together a very long, detailed letter outlining all the problems they'd had. Dean, bless him, was a little bit defensive about some of the ways it was dealt with, but I think what we want to try to do is work with whoever's the new CFO appointed, just to make sure that the whole thing gets done, organised properly, and that way it can be an example to Barnoldswick or Morrison if they want to proceed with a bid, or some sort of similar town high street support mechanism. So, I mean, if we need a second it, I'll second it. Or that's it.
Anybody else?
No.
Okay.
Yes, just to say that if you are interested in the bid and you have a town centre forum, I'm sure Bid will be very happy to come and make presentations and explain all the good bits and all the pitfalls and so forth.
Thank you for that, Sarah. So, yeah, everyone's okay with that? Read the recommendation, so all those in favour? Okay, next item is UK Resettlement Scheme and Afghan Relocation Scheme. This council has previously helped those less fortunate, refugees in our area, those people who are vulnerable. And the scenes we've seen during the past week, absolutely distressing and shocking, and I think we have a duty as a local council to do our bit towards helping those in need at this difficult time. So in terms of the recommendations which are before us, the first recommendation is really reaffirming the council's position in terms of the UK Resettlement Scheme, and that we accept refugee families from February 22, apologies. And the second recommendation is that we start holding discussions as soon as possible, as a matter of urgency in fact, with Calico and Together Housing and any other similar bodies, especially with the agency is far more greater, like I said, because of the events which have taken place in the last few days. And we do, in principle, agree at this stage and give a commitment that we do support the Afghan relocation scheme. I think the difficulty we have is in terms of the numbers. I've had this discussion with Philip because we don't know what the outcome of the discussion will be with Calico and Together Housing in terms of their capacity. But I think there is a firm commitment from this council that we do rehouse people in terms of this new scheme. So just want to open that up to members. I mean, in terms of number, there is difficult at this stage, but I'm interested to hear in terms of views. So Philip?
Can I just add that we've already had an initial discussion with Calico and Together Housing, and they said that in principle they're very happy to help, but they do need these further discussions about what the extent of the help that they can give, and in particular around the number of houses. And this is a problem which is affecting everybody, it seems. I was on the Lancashire Chief Executives meeting this morning, and everybody was saying, yes, we're making a firm commitment to help, but we don't know how many houses we can supply at this stage. So, and just to add that the government is being pressed to put more money into this scheme, which might help with the provision of housing. So, I think we need to await how those discussions go before we actually commit to a particular figure.
Councillor Iqbal and Councillor.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I mean, we've been here before, not necessarily with the Afghan relocation scheme, but in 2015 when the Syrian crisis was here, and God bless him, Tony Greaves at the time was deputy leader to myself, and Heather came forward, and there was the same discussion that government are dragging the feet on now, let's kick it not into the long grass, but let's talk about it. And at the time, we as a council were at the forefront in terms of persuading other Lancashire councils to say, look, we really need to up the ante here, and we I think took the biggest number of families out to the whole of Lancashire at the time, and other councils then followed suit. What I'm suggesting is that obviously along with other Lancashire leaders, and you obviously will attend Lancashire leaders meetings and have access to colleagues across the county, and Philip will in terms of his chief exec role, that you go on the front foot and say to other Lancashire leaders, look, there's no point in us collectively trying to feed the government narrative. And it's not a political point I'm making, it's a factual point, that when the Home Secretary says, look, we'll take as a country 5,000 in year one, people in year one might have lost their lives in Afghanistan people might have lost their lives in Syria if we'd have waited for the government narrative at the time. And I would strongly urge you in your capacity as leader to tomorrow boldly go out to Lancashire leaders and say, look, as a county, you know, it's easy to talk about things, but just imagine if any one of us were stuck at Carville Airport tonight, and if the British government, because there are British passport holders that are stuck there, you've all seen it on the news, but people that generally need the help need it now. What they don't want is to be waiting till February 2022 or 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. They want some action now, and I think this area's got a proud tradition of doing that, as opposed to other colleagues across the county and across the country. So whilst the recommendations are fine on a normal day, what I'd strongly urge you to do, and I don't know what the wording is to that we go out tomorrow to Lancashire leaders and you on behalf of our council say, no, let's not talk about this, let's collectively as Lancashire say, we will take, rather than take 20 families per council across Lancashire, and say to the government by the end of the week, well the end of the week is tomorrow, but by tomorrow if need be, to say, because we had this discussion in 2015 and people came to a decision very quickly, that we say to government, as Lancashire, we will lead in terms of this. And I think in terms of humanitarian respect, you will gain a lot of respect as a council and as a county, that rather than waiting for others to tell us what to do, that we're instigating the debate in that sense. So, like I said, on a normal Thursday night, the recommendations would be fine, but we're not in normal circumstances, and waiting will cost people's lives. You know, I'm not trying to be morty, but it's a fact.
No, I'm not suggesting for a second that we wait. I think it is urgent, like I've said, and we do need to act quickly. Discussions have already started, and we need to come to we need a firm decision from the housing association providers to tell us, as a matter of urgency, in terms of the numbers that we can accommodate.
But linked to that, Philip's point is crucial, that the government needs to stump up some money, because housing is an issue, but the other support mechanisms, and in 2015 they did. That's why we were able to act quickly.
There's already a commitment from the government, and I think the messages coming out from the government are now, look, this is urgent, and encouraging councils. I mean, we don't need any encouragement. I think the view is unanimous that we do act quickly and we do support this scheme. And like you said, I agree totally that we act on it as a matter of urgency.
Yeah, as a country, we've got a moral responsibility, and in my eyes anyway, it's imperative that we follow through with that. I'd go a little bit further than what Iqbal is suggesting, in that if we can get a collective view from the Lancashire authorities, we also, well, we don't necessarily need that collective view, but it would help. But we also need to be putting the pressure on government to actually enable the resettlement as a matter of urgency, and providing the resources to allow those families to come into Pendle and into Lancashire. And you know, we do have vacant housing stock. It might not necessarily be within the ownership of Together Housing or Calico, but it is not beyond the wit of man, if the resources are there, to actually acquire property that could then be used to take in refugees. And I mean, I go back to the days when we had a community Vietnamese boat people in Barnoldswick, which probably shows me age. But I think, you know, over the years, Pendle and its communities have opened our homes and opened our hearts to refugees. And I think that this is a situation where it is crying out for us to do that in spades. And so I would agree about, you know, the collective view within Lancashire, and, you know, get forward with this, but then, you know, put the pressure on government to say, well, look, you know, we've got an appetite, you know, to fulfil our obligations, but we do need some resources, and we need to be able to access the wherewithal to actually, you know, drive everything through. So, it's getting on to Andrew Stevenson and lobbying government, through every angle that we can, really.
Yeah, I think from discussions I've had with some leaders, there does seem to be a view that we do need to act quickly and urgently, and discussions which Philip has had with other chief execs. I think I'm right in saying there is a sense and a view that we do have a duty, a moral duty, to help these people who are in great danger and suffering immensely. So I think I'm right in saying that the gist of it is that there is a view that we do collectively, as much as possible, work across Lancashire. And yeah, by all means, I'll do whatever I can from my side to lobby and work with colleagues across Lancashire and our MP. There is support from the government. I think we need more details on that in terms of financial support, and we need that information as quickly as possible. Councillor David Coburn-Price.
Just a couple of quick points really. One, as you say, is the financing part. There's lots of shoulds and anticipators in here. So again, clarifying what the government will pay for and then state would be good. I think the other thing is in paragraph 4 with the 2016 experiences, are there any other lessons that we learned from that programme? I've heard tales about, whilst there's a package outlined in paragraph 8 about what they'll get when they arrive. If you have, for example, people living in one place and go to school in a different place, then the children won't make friends and that kind of thing. So how will all those sorts of lessons then be learned and put together? So I think possibly just a bit of quick thinking about what lessons were learned from that to make sure that we get it really right this time rather than just stumbling into it, as it were.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Can I just help? I mean, Wayne Forrest, who really has worked tirelessly in terms of the Syrian refugee, has picked up on the point that David said. There were lessons to be learned, but I think Wayne's best placed in terms of our council. He knows what the lessons were, and I think we learned from some of those over the last 3 or 4 years anyway.
Okay. The thing that I think the biggest problem was the quality of the housing stock, and I think the housing association route is far better, and that's why I'm suggesting if there's a need to buy houses that are currently vacant and manage them through the social landlords, that would be far better than to the difficulties that we've had previously.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think it is important in terms of once these people come here, independent, that we make it as easy and comfortable for them as possible, because some of the experience they will have had will be horrendous. We can only imagine what they will be going through. So I think, we do, as Councillor Iqbal said, will be lessons learned from previous experiences, so, and hopefully we can improve on that and help these people. Thank you. Okay, all in favour? Yeah. Okay. The next item is item 8, matters requiring financial approval. This is a request from Building Bridges for some extra funding. Colleagues will be aware of the fantastic work which Building Bridges does across Pendle for many years, and some of the work they do in terms of community cohesion and for generally across Pendle is absolutely fantastic, and I think they do need our help and assistance. Interested to see what other colleagues think. Councillor David Coburn-Price.
A quick question to start with. Where's the Reaching Communities Fund money coming from? Is that central government thing, or is that... So they applied for a grant for that and they got money from that, right, okay. I think, as you say, Chairman, I think there's lots of good projects on the way there. I think they've obviously taken a large step, I don't know what their annual budget is, but to get a significant amount of money like that to roll out some programmes, I think is excellent. My concern with a sort of budget hat on, as chairman of the budget working group, is I'd like to understand a bit more about their financing and their, the opportunities they have to raise money from elsewhere, rather than just thinking, well, we get a grant of 7.5 from Pendle, so let's just have a bit more, please. So I think there's probably some discussions or some investigations that there could be other funds they can apply for. There's plenty of these sorts of things knocking around. Some of the projects they've got as well, get them in touch with other organisations who can possibly help fundraising. There's some additional opportunities for them to raise money in other places, I would suggest, and that might be worth a discussion with them first.
Okay. Councillor Iqbal and Councillor Witt.
Is Councillor Coburn Price moving anything? Or?
I'm moving deferral of a decision.
What's she going to do about it?
Yes.
What was that instruction from Mr. Coburn?
Yeah, this is very helpful.
Well, it just sounded a bit woolly. I'm afraid I was interrogating him.
Is that new?
Defer the decision to award them additional funds to give time to have a meeting with them with a budget working group hat on, in order to be able to understand the funding opportunities that they have or the resources they have internally as well.
Okay.
I will second that.
Okay. Councillor Iqbal.
Chairman, I'm aware of what, and you are certainly aware as well, in terms of what Good Work Building Bridges are doing and have done for a significant amount of years. But if you just look at what they're asking us for, they're asking us for 45,000 over 3 years, i.e. 15,000 a year, and that will then lever in a significant amount of money. They've got a proven track record. We did that last time when we gave them 30,000. I'm just worried that if we're deferring it, that deferral might then cost or put in jeopardy the other funding that they're able to access. If it means moving an amendment, I'd be happy to, but unless Councillor Coburn Price accepts a different route, that in principle we accept that we allocate the 45,000, subject to, or we can delegate it to yourself and Philip or whoever. And then if, for example, that meeting is had with them next week to say, look, have you looked at X, Y, and Z, and they say, yes, we have, rather than them waiting another month to come back, the principle of decision is made tonight, and they can just proceed, or we can proceed as a council. I just think deferring to say, and I'm sure they've already done this, I've not had a conversation with them recently, but I'm sure they'll have done the exploration of other funding mechanisms before they come to us. But I would support that we give them agree to the 45,000 over the next 3 years. But if it means trying to get some consensus, that we delegate the decision to yourself and Philip, subject to discussions happening very quickly, and then by the end of next week, for example, if you two are clear in terms on behalf of the committee, then that's fine as far as I'm concerned. Deferring it for another month potentially could put the projects in jeopardy.
Just a question for this. Do we know if there would be an impact if we delayed making a decision? Are we aware of it?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Right, okay. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Witt?
Thank you, Chairman. I generally support what Carl said. I don't think it would be the right thing to defer this without some commitment. I say that because my principal contact with building bridges over the past 18 months has been through their work on COVID. And they did undertake projects, or are undertaking projects for Pendle as part of that programme. But those projects are self-contained schemes and don't help to cover their core costs. So, if we hadn't had a building bridges, we wouldn't have had an organisation to say, we've got this funding to do X, Y, Z, please can you do it? They wouldn't have been there, and we would have had to invent a wheel or something to be able to carry those things out. So I think it's important that this authority does give that commitment. We don't jeopardise external funding that they can lever in. And also that we don't expect them to cover core costs from project funding which presume, you know, in a lot of cases, the rules of the projects would prohibit them from, you know, trying to, you know, sort of put money towards their core operating. So basically, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Anybody? Councillor Mike Bolton?
Thank you, Chairman. What happens if they don't get the... I mean, they're already identified here that the continuation they reflect an expectation that reaching communities fund will provide less funding for the continuation of the scheme. And the project that requires a budget of 440,000. There's no mention in here of how much they see that being reduced by. So what exposure have we got in terms of if the requirement is 440,000 and they're not going to get anywhere near it, what are they going to be able to do from that point on? And is our funding then continues to go in, even though they may have insufficient to actually run the project?
Good question.
I mean, last time the way that it worked with myself and Dean was that the 30,000 that we put in was subject to them getting that 425,000.
Yeah.
And if they got less than the 425,000, it was agreed that they'd come back to Dean to revisit our contribution of the 13 in a sense. So if, for argument's sake, they didn't get 425, let's say they got 225, then the clear understanding with Building Bridges was that Dean, as the chief exec, or Philip in this case, would then review our contribution, if that makes sense. So if you agree to the 45, it doesn't mean that 45 goes into the mix, and if they get nothing from anywhere else, well, we just put 45,000 into the kitty. The understanding with Building Bridges last time, I'm sure it will be this time, is that if they get significantly less or less than what they're asked to put a bid in for, the conversation is then not with politicians, but obviously the chief exec. That's the way that it worked last time.
But I don't think we're arguing that there shouldn't be a meeting. I think there just needs to be a mechanism for, you know, sort of if we're comfortable with the principle of it, you know, make the decision tonight that then allows that to flow through following the meeting that is being called for.
Okay. Anybody else?
I would just say, we don't know, but if that's straightened that they brought it to the wire, so a month makes a huge difference to them, they should have made that clear. I suspect that a full analysis, this
tenders, item 9. Are we happy with that?
Just have one question, on 1A, why is there such a fundamentally huge difference between the two lower ones and two rather large ones? Were they putting for the same thing? Okay.
I would suggest, Chairman, that Wade Construction probably made a mistake and Askham Civil Engineering didn't want the job.
Yeah.
They put a price in, but...
And there's one on the back. There's one on page 2 as well. That's even higher.
Well, you don't know you've got the right deal to refuse to service. But they want to be kept in the
So, big difference between the three figures.
Yeah.
But I'll answer that question if I'm right. Okay.
Move it, Chair.
Thank you. Move it. Okay. That's fine. Thank you very much. Next item is exclusion of public and press, I'm afraid. Sorry. Thank you for attending.
You've got to pass it before you can
Yes.
get people
I'm
out.
happy to move that, Chairman.
Yeah. All those in favour?
Yeah.